Welcome to the Green Margin Podcast, where we talk about the financial and operational realities of running a cannabis business. I'm Daniel Sabet, and today we're talking about something that often gets overlooked, but plays a critical role in whether a cannabis business actually succeeds. That is the business plan. A lot of operators focus on licensing, real estate, and getting open, but without a strong business plan behind the business, it becomes much harder to raise capital, stay compliant, and operate profitably. So today we're going to talk about what goes on into a strong business plan and where the operators often get it wrong. Joining me today is Matt Khalili, the founder of Plan Writers, a firm that develops business plans for companies across a wide range of industries, including cannabis. Matt has worked with a lot of operators in all stages, from startups trying to enter the market to established businesses looking to raise capital or expand. He was also heavily involved in the Minnesota cannabis application process last year, helping clients navigate one of the newer and more competitive licensing markets. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Daniel. Real pleasure to be on this thing. It's really an honor. Thank you so much for having me be here.
No, absolutely. It's an honor to have you. So let's just start with what you do. For someone who may not be familiar with your work, what are the core services you provide at Plan Writers?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Plan Writers, everything really begins with the plan. At essence, we're a management consulting company, and what we really do is we help entrepreneurs achieve their goals. So usually a use case for a business plan is to help raise capital, secure loans, help to do some sort of licensing events, or some sort of internal strategy to help achieve goals. So usually my clients, Daniel, they're entrepreneurs. They're looking to be able to secure some kind of event. And we do financial projections, market research, analysis, and persuasive writing, be able to capture maybe an external audience or more technical writing for an internal audience and execution.
Very nice. And what does the process typically look like when a new client comes to you? What are the questions they're asking, and what's that initial onboard process?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Really good question. So our philosophy at our company is what we want to do is reverse engineer goals, right? So usually first thing is when we have a new client, they need to be able to provide a vision. Without vision, there's nowhere to be to lead clients. So for instance, if there is a goal to raise money for a luxury cannabis like product or a mass market cultivation or whatever the vision is, we really start at the end in mind, right? So what we like to do is think about what resources do you have, what's your background, what your gaps are, and then we try to think about what would a sophisticated investor want to know about this opportunity. We break those down, we ask those questions, and we help the clients come up with really good answers. So a good business plan in 2026 can't just be anything generic. It has to be very specific. It has to be able to say a lot with very little words, it needs to be visual, and it needs to show that the entrepreneurs really thought through a lot of all the different processes and anticipates a lot of questions that potential stakeholders would want to know about the business.
Yeah, very good. If we dig deeper into just the cannabis specific clients that you work with, would you say most of these clients are coming to you at their startup phase, or do you also work with more established operations?
Yeah, definitely we capture people earlier in the life cycle, and we tend to grow with some of those and deal with expansions. Fortunately and unfortunately, a lot of my clients do graduate from our service, which I'm really happy for them. And really, that's the goal to make ourselves obsolete. We start with people right at the beginning from seed funding, no pun intended, all the way to exit. But definitely, vast majority of our clients are in the startup phase.
Yeah, it makes sense because they need that plan to get their business running for multiple reasons, right? Whether it's for an investor, for an application, or just something to publish that gives them some sort of presence. And yeah, just going into that application process, I wanted to talk to you more about the Minnesota cannabis application process. I've been heavily involved in the Minnesota market myself. I've gone to a couple of the events. I went to the Lucky Leaf Expo the last couple of years, and I do see a lot of opportunity there. And it sounds like you do as well, which is why you're so involved in it. But I guess wanted to see from your perspective, what stood out about the market the most?
Yeah, Minnesota was a really interesting market, right? They gave a lot of micro licenses to a very large audience. So a few things we noticed. Number one, a lot of operators were willing to cross state lines to establish themselves there, a lot more than other markets. Seems a lot of expertise that was amortized in other states, right? They're like, they saw a big opportunity. People were willing to cross state lines even more so than past markets because we're finally at a stage where cannabis has reached a level of maturity and sophistication than in the past. Other things that were just really interesting in the market, right? They had very limited supply, right? So prior to it being recreational, it's really a lot of the native tribes that were involved in this market, right? So all of a sudden we're going from people getting dispensary licenses to there not being any cultivation outfits ready for distribution. So people have built distribution ready retail outlets without access to supply, and that's created new variables in our business plans that we have to come up with. I have to say the application process for Minnesota wasn't anything entirely innovative on it. I'd say it was a fairly democratic, accessible option if you were in the know. So that was all about applying on time and just dealing with the right compliance matters. So it wasn't very merit based, but it was very time sensitive. So if you got in at the right time, certain licenses were more coveted than others. It was a very democratic, open application process with very unique features. And I'd say like a good level of sophistication involved with a lot of my clients because I saw people leaving the California market to open up shops there. I've seen people leaving other markets in New Jersey and other more established recreational markets looking for expansion opportunities.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I remember Oklahoma was very similar in the timing and the ease of the license. Other states, they make you go through a bunch of expediters, lawyers, lots of time and money spent just to get the license. The barrier for entry is very high. But it seems like in Minnesota, especially with those micro licenses, people were applying for those just to get that dispensary going, but then they had the ability to do 5,000 square feet of canopy so they could supply their own dispensaries with flower. So I,
Correct.
yeah, so that was pretty good. And I noticed a lot of people were trying to potentially convert those into mezzo licenses to if they wanted to expand. Have you heard anything about how that process has been since then?
We haven't, right? I think a lot of operators are just trying to get their wherewithal because remember, getting a license is probably the easy part in the whole process. You have to get city approval, you got to negotiate a lease, right? Cities can renege on deals sometimes. It can be some places can be pretty bureaucratic. Just being able to getting an establishment ready and getting city approval is a whole challenge on itself. So we're not really in that stage just yet from what we're seeing, and but I'm sure these opportunities are happening.
Yeah, I mean, it has to. Let's talk about the importance of a strong business plan. A lot of operators I've seen, they either rush through it or just treat it like a formality. It's just like a check of the box. From your perspective, how important is a well-built business plan in cannabis?
Yeah, I think it's really mission critical, right? You're literally putting a lot of my clients are putting a significant part of their net worth. They're putting their reputation on the line, asking other people to give them money. They're taking money from financial institutions where they got to personally guarantee. So it would really behoove an individual to make sure they have a good plan in order. A good plan for a startup is a little different than one might expect, right? So putting together a forecast, it can put you in the right direction. But what you really want to know is can you really pressure test your business to see can you handle the uncontrolled variables? That's what we're really accounting for. So it's a lot easier to understand what type of cost you can control, how much cash do you need to be able to have in reserve, really understand what your unit economics look like, right? So people really misunderstand what the profitability looks like in a cannabis operation, right? So retail location is retail. What I mean by that is it has very similar features to like almost a restaurant. you have to reach a certain critical mass just to cover basic overhead, right? It's a labor intensive business. People think business just happens. You don't know how tough it is with employees not showing up, with labor costs going up, right? Dealing with compliance, dealing with the unknown. So whatever you think something is going to cost, it always costs a lot more. What you really need to understand is, can you make yourself a non-commodity product in the market? And what does it take? That really takes clear vision, understanding who your customers are, proper positioning, right? To be able to command any type of premium or value in the market. So these days, it's not just opening up a shop and a sign out the door for business, right? It's really about, can you really personalize your offering in the marketplace? And that really just takes a lot of documentation and understanding what your goals are, right? So if you don't set goals, you're much less likely to hit them. And statistically, Dan, I've heard from our research, I would say people who plan properly are 50 to 60% more likely to succeed in endeavor and much more likely to be able to hit more revenue figures than if they didn't plan.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like one of the biggest problems is in their projections. They have unrealistic projections, and then they don't understand how things can fluctuate 6 months in, 1 year in, 2 years in. I've seen it myself. The cost per pound of flour in any new market usually starts out at a pretty decent rate, but then as the market gets more and more saturated, that price comes down, and then they have to sell it for less, but then they're still paying their employees the same amount, and they just never accounted for that change, and it just eats away at their cash flow. Have you seen similarities there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the new norm in any cannabis business is you have to be able to make, I'd say, the majority of your profits in the first 2 to 3 years. Your plan needs to assume price per flower is going to decline. And that's going to create downward pressure on retail prices as well, right? So as a retail operator, you're going to have the same amount of sales on a lower cost basis, right? I would say lower prices, lower revenues need to be part of the plan. And that's okay. You can build perfectly good models around this if it's structured properly and you set the right goals and expectations. And I think what that does is it pressures the operators to be really precise and take extra care of their operations in the beginning. So you're not figuring it out later and lose market share during that time.
Yeah, I feel like people in the beginning, they're making a little bit of money, they get excited, they start taking excess distributions. They don't put money back into the business, and then they don't also put money aside for taxes. And then taxes are due, all obligations are due. There's a price compression that happens, and now they're low on cash flow, and then they've already spent the money that they've taken out, and it just becomes a big cluster.
And Daniel, what I'll do is I'll just double down on that. Think about what happens, right? Usually, if someone starts a cannabis business, it might be in the middle of a year, right? And there's a ramp up period. Hey, you're seeing money, you're paying some taxes on it. You may not realize exactly what's going on. You're making money the following year, right? And you may not really understand the tax implications. And then finally, you got a full year of like business growth during your peak and best performance, and you think it's always going to be like that. Then you realize how much you actually owe on taxes after that first full year of operations and stabilized value, right? And then you're used to taking a high level of distributions. You take that lifestyle increase, okay? And then on your second and third year, you have declining revenue and you have a lot more tax obligations than you realize because it takes time for to really understand as an operator what exactly your liabilities are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The liabilities seem to stack up over time. They just keep getting bigger and bigger if they're not managed properly. And a lot of people have misconceptions of net income versus cash flow because obviously when you're putting more money into inventory to keep the business afloat, that's money that's eating away at your cash flow. And then even for operators who are in cultivation or manufacturing, not managing their AR properly, not collecting the money fast, that hurts their cash flow in a way where now less money to keep the train going.
Inventory, work in progress, these are very complicated features. And these are small, a lot of small business operators coming in, trying to really solve complex problems, right? And it's really hard to understand exactly what your balance sheet looks like in such a dynamic, declining environment. So 100% I agree with you. And then what happens is employees, people, other people think you're making so much money because they see just transactions and revenue coming in, but they don't understand that doesn't always result to as much profit as one might think. So people demand higher wages, and service industry is tough, right? It's definitely not an easy business, and it's not for everybody. You can do very well if you have the right planning in place. And I think a big part of it, Daniel, is taxing and the service you provide. It's really valuable to have a proper CFO guide you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it works both ways. When you get started, you got to have a good foundation, and then once you're operating, you need someone to hold your hand through the process to make sure you're compliant, optimizing your tax bills, and just understanding your numbers in real time. Just going back to the business plan, though, I just want to get a better understanding. In your opinion, what does a strong business plan actually look like? So I guess more of what separates a solid one from an average one? Is it a certain amount of pages? Is there like certain highlights that need to be in there? Like for someone to be taken seriously in this whole thing, like what details are most pertinent?
Yeah, great, Daniel. I'll do my best to answer that. First of all, it's definitely not the number of pages. In fact, I would say if you don't have relevant information to share, the more pages you add, that is, I'd say fluff, right, actually makes you lose credibility, right? You definitely want to write with purpose everything that you say. Second thing is you have to have really good structure and vision. So a business has different phases, and you can really plan best in the earlier parts of the phases. After, if you plan too long, it becomes too speculative. So really we want to focus on the first 2 years in in the startup phase at least. And we want to know what resources does it take to be operational? Okay. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your gaps? Okay. Do you have the resources needed to get to that gap? Being able to, just because you build a place doesn't mean people are going to come. Just because you have a cultivation or retail or anything in the supply chain doesn't mean people are automatically going to buy your product, right? Do you understand what business acquisition is? Do you have the right benchmarks in place that are challenging but realistic within your industry, right? And your market, okay? Do you understand your market? Are you a primary market? Are you a secondary market? Are you a tertiary market? There's more inefficiencies in other markets, but then there may be much less business to be absorbed over there as well. If I have to break it down, it's all about specificity. It's about cushion. It's about setting the right goals. It's about using defensible third-party sources, right? Sometimes they don't exist, so you have to extrapolate that data from other states, other industries, right? And at the end of the day, whatever you're going to do, you have to know it's going to be wrong. So it's not about the actual numbers we use, it's about how much cushion those numbers have. And things with higher cushion, higher margins to play with, right, is going to be able to absorb changes better. And then there's also I would say, the qualitative side of things, right? Are you really able to express your vision, right? I like to use this word lucid vision. Can you close your eyes and really understand what this business looks like, what's operational? Are you able to communicate that with writing? Do you have, can you put the visuals in the plan that represent what this is going to look like? Do you understand who needs to be hired, when they need to be hired, what the prevailing wage is? Can you build an org chart? Can you build the right SOPs to make sure that this is in place? And you don't have to always reinvent the wheel either, right? But you have to be able to make smart benchmarking, right? And you have to be able to have, like, basically understand your customers, have the right marketing plan, and you need to be able to express that with data that is really relevant. Okay. If you try to fluff those sections, you lose all your credibility. No one wants to read it.
No, said. One thing I've noticed about this market, and one thing that really touched home with me when you talked about the different types of markets that there are, whether it's first tier, second tier, tertiary. I noticed that I had a couple clients who were in South Dakota who actually did very well, and now they're trying to open up stores in Minnesota. And from what I remember, South Dakota's sales, at least their top line sales, aren't nearly what they would be in California or New York or some of these bigger markets. But if they run the business right, their margins are very strong. The advantage of South Dakota, they have lower cost of labor, the rents are lower, their legal, their accounting costs, all the overhead costs are a lot less. So if they just run a tight ship and hit those, they have different benchmarks compared to other markets. But if they hit those benchmarks correctly and they understand what they are, they could be very successful. And I feel like Minnesota is the same thing. You're gonna have a lot of licenses. It's gonna at some point get a little oversaturated, and you don't have the wealthiest people who are spending high amounts on average ticket, but you there's a lot of market to capture, and as long as you just run a tight ship, you can do very well. And I think that goes back to the business plan. You just have to set the right expectations, understanding those numbers and the markets that you work in. So that's great points over there.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll say, Daniel, is everything has its challenges, but something about these smaller markets that are great, it just doesn't have the right talent pool. The people that can execute are really going to stand out there, right? Primary markets are definitely going to be fierce. Like sometimes really people just look for cannabis desert pools to be able to operate in too. Definitely it's not always about the flashiest, sexiest location, right? It's about what really makes you the most money.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's funny, I live in Los Angeles, and you would think that the dispensaries that are in the heart of Los Angeles are the most successful. And some are. Some of them have good marketing campaigns and they do pretty well, but majority of them, if you compare them to other parts of LA, the parts of the Valley, Chatsworth, Van Nuys, those areas, or even if you go all the way down to Orange County and Santa Ana, I feel like those areas typically do a little better. And someone from out of town who comes to California would think the opposite. They would think, oh, like same thing with New York, going to Manhattan versus some of these other parts of New York, like Albany or Buffalo. But it's not always the case. You have to really study the market and study demographics to see what's successful and what's not.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I'm all about maybe not going in these big city centers and going outside. It allows the smaller players to have a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Matt, before we wrap up, what's one thing operators should understand about building a business plan if they want to succeed in this industry?
Absolutely. I think quality of research is very important. Sometimes you have to be willing to spend research that's behind the paywall to get good research, right? A plan is only as much as the good inputs that you put in it. AI is a good tool, but AI is never going to be able to capture like proper vision and give you specific numbers that might make sense for you. So I know people like to use it, but think of AI as a calculator. Like a business plan is a human endeavor and you're putting your life into it, right? Even if you're a very wealthy person, it's going to take a lot of your time and opportunity cost. And if you're going to be committing years into building this business, the most important thing to do is it's like your blueprint, it's your architecture. So just make sure you invest in good research and look in your mirror, right? Don't BS yourself with these numbers, right? Make sure these numbers, right, are credible and they make sense. And you're using these as your benchmarks, right? And listen, if you need help, like there's people like Daniel, there's people like myself, like you don't have to do this yourself. Get help if you think you need it. There's lots of great companies out there, and you can do it if you put in the work. And it's very necessary work.
Well said, Matt. And thanks again for joining me today. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to the Green Margin podcast. We'll see you next time.